go get my tonsils removed, because it's back when they used to do that. And my grandmother, she bought me one of those like 3-packs. They used to come in the plastic that they would sell at the supermarket, and she brought me a little 3-pack of comics, and I read it, and that was it. And I was really obsessed with them from that point on.
Do you remember which ones they were?
I distinctly remember one of them was a Captain America issue. I think maybe an X-Men Classic.
Okay.
I think X-Men Classic came a little after those. But I really gravitated towards X-Men. That was a big one for me.
What was sort of the appeal of comics at the time? What did you find in them that you maybe hadn't experienced?
I think I could so vividly see them in my head. I think comics just really worked for my brain. I know that, some people have a little more difficulty with them. Some people prefer books, and I actually now really do enjoy books. But at the time, like, my brain just really clicked with comics.
Were you drawing or doing any art?
I was drawing. I was really into drawing from a really early age. I think the first thing that I wanted to be was an artist, and that was something I knew pretty early on.
And what kind of stuff were you drawing then? Just like fine art or just regular?
It was just, I remember I had to do one of this thing I placed third in was we had to draw like a playground with people playing on it. But it was all like stick figures. So it was very good. And then, then I was like in this band for a little bit, and then I thought that was good. Oh no, this is another band. This is like a middle school band. I got kicked out of that, and I just wasn't a very good guitar player, so that's what it was. So then I was like, well, what am I going to do now? So then I was like, I'm going to do comics, and that was my fallback.
So you were always in a variety of different things then, if you were music, comics.
Yeah, I was always into those two things. I was into trying a lot of different stuff too.
Like, what other kind of things were you doing as a teenager when you were reading comics? And I mean, like D&D and...
D&D, yeah, D&D started early for me. D&D was about 3rd grade, and we were very lucky because a friend of mine and another friend of ours, his college-aged brother was the DM. So we had like a pretty legit 80s college student DM. And we were all in the 3rd grade, so really enjoyed it. I always loved it. I still do it, I still play D&D.
Nice. So in Doom Patrol 3, you use a comic book shop.
Yes.
In Dannyland, and that's like a real comic book shop that you used to go to?
That's the comic shop that I kind of grew up in and got my first job and, really discovered things like Doom Patrol. I'd already discovered Watchmen and Dark Knight before that, but then when I came in, I started to discover kind of more obscure stuff, and around that time I was also discovering things like Love and Rockets as well because of a friend's sister had showed that to us. So, but that shop in Doom Patrol 3, and some of those people that you see reaching for books, those are actually some of the people that, one of them was the owner of the shop, and one of them worked there, one of them actually was a friend of mine and an inker. They're in that panel too, but that's the shop.
Is the store still around?
No, it got, what happened is there was a holdup, there was a robbery, and I was there, and then after that the shop closed.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess what always appealed to me is about comic shops when I was younger is that like it was a sense of community. It was like the one place you could go to meet other people who are reading comics. Mm-hmm. So even like as a youngster, I'd hang out at one, and they just let me hang out all day.
Yeah, they just let that was that kind of shop. You just came in, and that's how I met like my best friend at the time, and they just let you hang out all day, and eventually they let you work behind the counter and sell comics.
When did Doom Patrol then come across your path? Like,
right about that, I had a friend named Scott, and he brought me into the shop, and he worked there at the time. And he was reading all that stuff, so he was reading Grant Morrison's Richard Case's run into Rachel Pollack's run. So he had got me into Doom Patrol. And I can't remember the first one. I do believe it might have been an issue or two before or after the where they have the group therapy, which I think is an issue in the 30s possibly.
I think it was like 35 or something.
Yeah.
I had to look it up recently to find it.
Yeah, and then I backtracked a little bit.
What was it about, I guess, Doom Patrol that was different than what you had been reading before? What appealed to you?
Well, it was my first experience with group therapy. I wasn't familiar with those kind of things. Even though I had experienced depression from a young age, I still didn't understand what therapy was because it was kind of not looked upon as a positive thing at the time. So it was my first exposure to that. It was my first exposure to characters that struggled with mental health. Up to that point, I'd been reading X-Men, and their biggest problem was that they were like too attractive. Yeah, so attractive in a photograph. You couldn't take photographs of the X-Men. That was like their big drawback. But Doom Patrol was really different. They had a lot of pretty serious problems.
So did you find the comics themselves to be somewhat therapeutic when you were?
I did, yeah. I found the comics to be therapeutic. I found them to help you understand the differences that exist between you and other people, and then learning to not only accept those, but to embrace those. It was a really inspiring book for me. And then, that was right around then was kind of the birth of Vertigo. So I was discovering Sandman, and it was really the birth of Vertigo that brought me into cooler stuff.
Do you hope to communicate similar things in comics? Have you been looking to do something with your work that puts a message out there, or is it just kind of telling stories that you want to tell? Or?
In the case of Doom Patrol, one of the things that really drew me to that book was the fact that I realized that I knew that I could talk about mental health, and there's not a lot of books where you can really do that so much, or you can, but Doom Patrol has a history of that. When we created Young Animal, we didn't seek to recapture what Vertigo was doing in the beginning. I think the only main thing was that we were using older characters that were a little bit obscure, maybe a little bit off the radar, and that was the approach that was very Vertigo. But then the books ended up being very different. Like, there was no Gotham book back in Vertigo days. There was no adventure book. So they have a bit of a different flavor.
I feel like a lot of the Young Animal stuff, like early Vertigo, they each just have their own point of view, their own flavor. I remember Sandman Mystery Theater was one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was a good one.
And what I loved about that is it was like a relationship between two people basically over the entire course of the series, and Wesley and Diane, which was something I had never seen in comics before.
Yeah, it was really amazing stuff happening during that period.
So did you think at that time that Vertigo type books were where you were going to go? Did you have a plan for what you were going to do in comics?
Well, I was really into vigilantes though. So let's back up a little. I started to get into super violent vigilante books, indie ones, like Faust or Grips, or just really super Tim Vigil hyper violent stuff. And so that was the kind of early stuff that I wrote. But then when I kind of discovered Vertigo, it brought an intelligence to the writing, and a sophistication, a little more maturity to what I was doing. That by the time I was in high school and I went to then art school, I was more interested in telling those type of stories.
And it was at art school that you met John Rivera, right?
Yeah, John and I met at SVA. He was, we met in a comedy writing class, and we were the only two people that made each other laugh, and so we hit it off right away, and then he's been my friend ever since, and occasionally we write things together.
Were there other people in going to SVA at that time?
Farrell
Dalrymple?
Yeah, he was in, we had a experimental writing class together. Dave Roman, I believe Raina was going there at the time. James Kuhn had just graduated. I'm trying to think who was kind of around, and that's maybe.
That's pretty impressive lineup.
Yeah.
And back then they were one of the only schools that focused on comics in any way.
Yeah, because they started as a cartooning school, or an illustration school rather, back in I believe the '60s, and then they were one of the only schools where you could go and get a degree and also learn how to make comics.
And where did you go after that? What was sort of the course after you got out of art school?
The course after I got out of art school was really, for a little bit of time, I was trying to break into comics. So I went through that for a couple of years. And then I eventually was able to land this really amazing job doing toy design. and I did that until the band that I had started at the time started to really take off, and we started to get these really crazy opening gigs where we'd open up for like Jimmy Eat World at like a county fair, and it was like, 12,000 people and stuff like that. So that really took off. So then I had to quit my toy design job, and then I had to kind of give up on comics at the time, and then focus on the band all the time, all my time that I did.
Right. What kind of struck me about when I discovered my chem and discovered your music is it felt like you were presenting a very almost comic booky, it was a comic book presentation. You guys seem to have like identities on each album, and of course the artwork was very much like a comic book. Was that something you were conscious about creating these sort of secret identities for yourself?
I think so, yeah. I think the art that I kind of had brought to the band was really, it was a way, I was kind of almost like, if I'm going to do this band, then I'll just use every skill that I had. And one of the skills that I felt like I had developed through comic books was creating characters and kind of worlds. So I knew I wasn't going to be making comics or books anymore, so I decided, let's see if I could work this into the music that I'm making, and it worked really well.
I think that's one of your main talents is you have this real knack for interesting characters with interesting names, like you're good at titles.
Right.
Like song titles I've always found really, the smear's not big enough for the both of us kind of thing. But even like Umbrella Academy, that's such a bizarre name.
Yeah.
But it's so striking at the same time.
There's this band that I really love called Stiffs Inc., and they were on American Records for a brief moment, but they were a New York City band. It was kind of Victorian goth, and it was really cool. And then eventually the singer of that band had formed this band called the Umbrella Brigade, and I was like, oh, that's the coolest. And then I was like, well, I can't call my comic that, even though they're two totally different things. So, but then the story changed anyway, and it became an academy, and it became a group of family members.
So how did Umbrella Academy get started? What was sort of the genesis of making that actually become a real thing?
I think I'd hit a point with, because at that point we weren't really creating anything anymore in the band, because we were touring so much on Revenge, so it was just touring. I mean, sure, we wrote songs, but there wasn't a lot of room for creation, so I really started to miss being creative. And it was right around that time that they started to reprint the Doom Patrol graphic novels from Grant and Richard's run, and they started reprinting them, and they were super, and then I got to reconnect with those stories. And, reading that version of Doom Patrol, that inspired me to say, I'm gonna make comics again. They may not exactly be like these comics, but it made me really want to do them again. And then Umbrella Academy, in a lot of ways, was really inspired by the original Doom Patrol series. Even the first issue title, The Day the Eiffel Tower Went Berserk, was a riff on the day the Negative Man went berserk in a very early issue of Doom Patrol.
That was like the Arnold Drake, Bruno Premiani.
Yeah, Arnold Drake and Bruno Premiani, that was that stuff. So it was inspired, it was like the catalyst for me deciding to write comics again. And then I was inspired by Grant's run, but I tried to make something very different. I was also really inspired by New Frontier. I was really inspired by that. I remember reading that, and it made me believe in superheroes again, and I think that's why I decided to tell a superhero story with Umbrella Academy. It's even a little more classic Umbrella Academy than Doom Patrol. And the books now are very different, but New Frontier was a big inspiration on Umbrella.
So how long then was the, the genesis between you're on tour for Revenge and then it happens?
By the time, so we're on tour for Revenge, we're in probably our second and a half year on that, or second year, and it was almost time to make a new record. We were just finishing up some arena touring on Taste of Chaos and things like that. And then what happened? And then it was time to make Black Parade. It was time to write that, and I put everything into that. And then, but as that was finishing, I was I was almost ready to make comics again. So I had done all this design work at that time, and I brought a notebook with me wherever I went, and just kind of always worked on these characters, did these marker drawings of them. And then it was time, and then it was, I started the deal right when we were finishing Parade, and then Umbrella Academy came out, I think, a year after that.
Okay. And did you immediately, who brought in Gabriel Ba? Was that Scott Alley?
That was Scott Alley, yeah, he brought in Gabriel Ba. It was, I had submitted Umbrella Academy to Dark Horse as a pitch. So I did this pitch that was pretty sick, and it had, I had drawn all the characters, I had planned it out, and then Mike Richardson had read it through his assistant Eric Weiler at the time, and then it went to, and then, you know, Mike handed it over to Scott Alley, and Scott started editing it, and he loved it, and then he brought Ba into it.
And you have a pretty good collaboration with Ba. How much did he bring visually to?
He really built that world, and he totally understood it. When I would explain things like I want it to be vaguely European, I want the cars to look like maybe Cold War cars or European cars, you know, and they have such a beautiful architecture in Sao Paulo where he's from that I think he drew from that. He's one of the, I don't think there's a lot of artists like this, but he loves drawing architecture like it was a character. So I know some people dread drawing backgrounds when they're drawing, but he loves architecture.
Because what I loved about Umbrella Academy is when I first read it, it just felt like it arrived fully formed, and it was just, it felt like even in the first 6 issues that there was like a rich history already right behind it, that there was 100 issues out there that I hadn't read yet.
Right.
How extensive was your background on that kind of stuff?
I was kind of winging it constantly. So every time I needed a piece of background information, I just made it up on the spot. And that was done intentionally because the biggest problem that I had at the time with mainstream comics was that you did need to know the entire history in order to enjoy them. And when we made Umbrella Academy, I really wanted to make a book that was for people that didn't necessarily read comics. You know, I wanted you to be able to feel like there was this long history, but you're just jumping into it, but you don't need to know anything else. So I made it very accessible. We tried to.
I think, there's a certain confidence if a writer knows his characters, that if you've never thought about, like, say, what their hobby was in high school, if someone asks you, it usually comes because you know your characters.
Yeah, that's what happened with Umbrella Academy. So every time we needed, like, a little something, like in the case of, Vanya and Kraken's punk band that they had, like, that didn't exist before I needed an extra story. So then I was like, oh, they probably had a punk band together. So knowing the characters so well, it did just kind of come right out.
And what was it like to start going to conventions as opposed to, say, you're on tour, you run into fans all the time, but like, what's the different kind of interaction that you found once you started doing comics?
Well, the one thing that was always cool about music is a little more abstract, I guess. And in the comic, it's a bit more direct, which is why I like jumping back and forth, and sometimes I like being very abstract, like because in Alien, I was pretty abstract on that record, and I enjoyed it. And then, but I had a strong desire to connect with people directly again, so that was why I went back into comics. So when you're doing a convention signing, you're talking more about the stories that you're creating and the characters, and you get to learn what characters people love, But with music, it's a bit different because people connect with songs instead of characters.
Right.
What's
it like seeing someone walk up and they're dressed as one of your characters?
It's amazing. It's, you never get tired of it. It's always exciting to see how somebody interprets something that you helped create.
Even when they're like party poison and they're kind of you.
Yeah, we really did work hard in my chem to create these larger than life characters that it makes sense to me. Like it was a bit different than something like Kiss, but it wasn't that different, and I made sure that all the records were concept records so that way you could create these characters,
Yeah, because what I loved about the Na 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 video was it was like a bunch of guys goofing off and having fun playing like live, like LARPing almost.
Yeah, it was LARPing. Especially in that second video for Sing, where we're doing that scene where we were killing all those guys and we were getting killed, and that was the best part, shooting that. But it really felt like you were LARPing.
Yeah, and in a way, almost getting like to kill your hero with Grant Morris.
Well, he got to kill me.
He had to kill you.
Yeah, which was amazing. And I'd always wanted him to kill me. That was a really early idea.
So, did you guys start talking about Doom Patrol then? Did you sort of dig in?
Yeah, I think the way it goes with me and Doom Patrol was we were about to go to South America to tour, I believe, on Parade, and but it was like way towards the end of it, and then the last Doom Patrol graphic novel came out, and I had been talking to Shelley Bond about writing Doom Patrol, and I just was super inspired after I read that last graphic novel. I landed in a hotel in Brazil, and then I just wrote these kind of first 6-7 pages kind of spilled out of me, and then it would take years before I was officially writing Doom Patrol, but the talk started very early, and I would, the band was like taking a lot of my time, and I was always afraid about having that, like, it's different when you write we create Umbrella Academy, we have time because they're limited series, they're not ongoing.
Yeah.
But you see what happens when you get in a situation with a monthly comic and you've got other stuff going on. You have what we kind of had happen with Doom Patrol, which is stuff starts to get later and later.
Right.
And then you have to do things like adjust the schedule to make sure that you build breaks in and things like that. But even with all that, I'm not doing music so much right now, even though I'm building a home studio. So that's almost finished, so I get to start making music again.
Nice.
I miss it.
Yeah!
The trick is to be able to make the music and to make the comics at the same time. I think without both those components in my life, I don't think I'm as happy, If I have to just focus on one, I'm not as happy about that.
It's going to be an interesting thing. Like, what's the difference for you? What do you get out of each? Because, like, when I did comics and I did novels, and I wrote my novels, that was my solitary experience. That was all me. And then comics was, like, almost my coffee break where I get to play with friends.
Right.
Is there a difference in what you get out of each discipline or each art?
I kind of almost had the opposite reaction as you, whereas making music felt like I was getting to do stuff with my friends, and then when I got to make comics, it felt like a very solitary thing, even though I would end up collaborating.
Yeah.
But it still is, like, I'm a lot more closed off these days and disconnected from other human beings because I'm writing so much. And it's a lot harder for me. Writing comics is like a real crazy challenge, whereas music is a challenge, but it's more just draining and it takes a lot out of you physically, but it comes very natural to me to write songs, even if they're good or bad or whatever, they still come out naturally. Whereas with comics, I've really gotta, I can't wait for the inspiration, I have to just do it.
Yeah, if we compared our scripts, like my script, comic scripts were way more sparse than yours.
Yeah.
And I think if people pick up the Doom Patrol Director's Cut, you get the first issue scripts, and they can see how much you put into like every description. Like, they're heavy duty scripts. Yeah,
they are heavy duty scripts, and they've always been that way. I've always tried to art direct the artist, and they always put their own thing on it and their own spin, and they really make it come alive, the artists. But I try to give them as much information as possible.
Well, and you have so much too to the stories, it feels like you're often distilling it into the essence of this idea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, by the time we get to Doom Patrol 6, you have a lot of stuff that's happened in those first 5 issues.
It's true. And it was interesting with Doom because we started off kind of gradually and tried to ease people into the strangeness of that world.
Right.
And then by the time you're at the end of issue 3, you're really getting stuff kind of fired at you, information.
How important is it to you to sort of honor the original Doom Patrol legacy?
It's super important, and it's interesting when you start a comic like this, you take over a monthly comic, you can, a lot of people's attitudes are like, you just go in and do your thing and don't worry about the stuff that came before it, right? But I was like, no, I want our version to work on every level.
Because I didn't even know there was a run of Doom Patrol that Keith Giffen had written, and
yeah,
I found out about that from you.
Yeah, and it ended abruptly too. Like, there's this really fun take on it that Keith Giffen was doing. And he did a lot of really funny stuff. I guess it's weird, but it's funnier than it's weird. It's more funnier. It's more whatever. It's fun.
So your idea is you're folding everything and
I'm trying, yeah.
and linking it all together.
I'm trying because I really do want, you know, the run that Nick and Tamara and Todd and I are doing to really, and now Tom, who's helping us with it, I really want it to count. I want it to be very difficult to erase what we've done.
Nice.
Yeah.
And let's talk about Nick Darrington.
Yeah.
You wrote you wrote an afterword for the Doom Patrol trade, which will come out in June, and you all get to read this afterward. But you mentioned in there like how basically you were so lucky that lightning struck twice. You got Gabriel Ba,
Yeah.
Umbrella Academy, and Nick Darrington.
Yeah.
Doom Patrol. Like talk a little bit about your guys' relationship and how you
Sure.
work together.
Yeah, and you're right. You know, one of the things I do mention in the afterword is that it was like lightning striking twice. And obviously had a deep connection with Becky Cloonan too, and we did find a lightning and a momentum there. But that was more of a collaborative thing. That was Sean as well. So it felt more of like a group collaboration than just a direct chemistry with one individual. And so meeting Nick like changed all that, and I was just like, wow, I can't believe I have another really intense connection with another artist. I never thought that would happen, and that we're truly trying to make the same book, you know. But yeah, he became like a brother, and we're like the same age. We have the same kind of punk rock background. We both really dig the same artists, the same music. And like I was saying, we really want to make the same book.
Yeah, Nick's super punk rock. Like at
Yeah.
first he's not, but when I'm hanging out with him and it's the evening's wearing on, he starts like getting like anti-corporate. You know what you should do?
Yeah. It's super great. I love that about him, that he gets anti-corporate.
Yeah.
It's really cool. We're doing a really cool thing in Arc 2 that is pretty anti-corporate, or it's at least a commentary on corporate inner workings and corporate entertainment. And you get to see some of that. I think he's really psyched about that.
Everyone keeps asking me at the start of Doom Patrol 4 in Lucius's room.
Yes.
There's all those posters. Who came up with all those posters? And is that both of you?
All Nick.
Wow.
We talked in depth about the kind of metal that Lucius listens to, and I was like, I think he listens to kind of super classic pure metal like Merciful Fate and things like that, and then probably like newer subgenres like black metal. So we wanted this mix of stuff that looked like early 80s, like devil worship heavy metal, and also and then like black metal and things like that. But Nick came up with every one of those.
Because reading back over the issues again recently for the trade, I noticed even in this comic shop scene, all the great Danny comics.
Oh my God. And most of those were Nick again. And Nick really enjoys coming up with that stuff. Like, he puts a lot of care into it.
Yeah. Well, the level of detail that's in your script is like he matches it with his own extra level of
Yes,
detail.
he does.
It's kind of crazy how
Yep.
much, that's part of why those books take so long. It's
Yeah.
so much going into it.
There is. Every single page feels like, even more than Umbrella, it feels like there's almost double the amount of ideas per page than there is in Umbrella Academy.
How did you guys collaborate on, there's the sequence in 3 to where Casey discovers herself in the comic and it's riffs on all these classic comics?
That was really fun to collaborate on. Well, we started by realizing we did want Danny. Well, one of the things that as soon as we established that Danny was an ambulance, then Nick and I started riffing back and forth at all the different things Danny could be like,
Right.
and then Nick would spew out stuff like, he'd come up with stuff like Danny the T-shirt, and Danny the comic was something that we actually both talked about, and then we was like, great, let's make part of issue 3 Danny the comic, you know, and then we really talked about kind of like all the different comics we could nod to and things like that. That's still my favorite sequence in the whole series.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And then what Todd Klein did with the lettering
Yes.
and what Tamara Bundlin did with the coloring.
Yes.
It's like everyone bringing their A game.
Yeah, that's to me the scene in Doom Patrol in the first series that really clicks. Because you also get a lot of information about Casey, and up to that point you haven't gotten so much, you know. But that's a really important moment in Arc 1.
So I think, yeah, when you're later on in your cranky Alan Moore phase, DC can do like before Doom Patrol and do all the Casey Brink comics.
Yes, you do those. That was what was cool or exciting to me about doing mainstream comics was you create these characters, and then I was always interested to see what people would do with them afterwards.
Right.
You know, after you're done with them, like I'd be like, I'm totally cool with somebody writing Casey Brink after we're done with Doom Patrol. I think that'd be amazing to see where that character goes and how they transform even further.
Well, that's even part of the legacy of comics is like you get to join in on Doom Patrol, and then somewhere down the line, someone else that was inspired by you gets to join in, and the great collaborative nature of all of that.
Yeah, or hates what you did and tries to erase it, which you see a lot when you're reading people's different runs of the same title. You'll be like, oh, that guy must have not liked what came before.
Right.
And they try to erase stuff. But I actually thought about Casey, and I figured out a way that I'm going to work this into Doom Patrol, where she can't be killed off or erased. I've already worked it in there. So even if somebody does kill her, it'll be like it doesn't count, and I'll have an explanation for that. So she's safe in my eyes.
Is there a character in Doom Patrol that you most identify with, or that is maybe even like an avatar for you in the book that you channel stuff into? Or
in some way, all of them have a little bit, you know, like there's this kind of inherent sadness and confusion to Larry that I think that I experience. There's this kind of grouchy older attitude that Cliff has that I also experience. And then there's Jane, who's like trying to live in harmony with herself that I experience. And then with Casey, trying to, this newly found, not even newly found, but I discovered a positivity in my life. I really worked towards positivity after spending so much of my time in my 20s wanting to do positive things, but using maybe negativity or aggression to achieve those things. I became a lot more calmed down over the years. I'm just not angry anymore, and I'm just, you know, I want to just live in relative peace with people now.
Yeah, I think I told you this, like when they were, the Black Parade 10th anniversary stuff was happening, I was listening to an NPR program where they were discussing it. And
I heard about that one, yeah.
And it was like, because it was like completely different points of view. It was a couple African-American commentators who was like, I couldn't tell my friends I listened to My Chemical Romance when they went to school. So I then went down this rabbit hole where I was like buying all your videos on iTunes. And trying to put together like, I know that guy, but that's not that guy I know. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was. You know, the band breaking up was obviously a really sad thing and really intense, and it was hard to deal with for at least a couple years. And then everybody that could or was inspired to went on to make their own stuff, which I was really happy about. But it wasn't until after I finished Hesitant Alien that the growth process really felt like it started to begin for me. And I did start to kind of go and try to change things about myself actively and try to learn more and try to be a calmer, better person and just bring more positivity and light as opposed to trying to achieve good things through aggressive methods.
That's like your Instagram these days is, when it's not about comics, it seems to be all positive.
Yeah, it is. I've changed a lot. I've kind of come a long way, and I spend a lot of time in therapy, and like that definitely helped too. It was really, really beneficial for me.
What do you think then, as you return to music, how are you going to bring that over? How do you think that will change what you do?
I think it'll be probably. I don't think I'll ever lose a sense of melody, but I think it'll be as weird as Doom Patrol. Do you think that, I don't know what it'll sound like, but usually whatever I'm writing or creating comic-wise connects to the music I'm making. And I think Hesitant Alien was more like the early Doom Patrol stuff that I was working on before I finally pulled the trigger on it. Like stuff I was working on for this run, for this series. That felt like connected to Hesitant Alien, but as I go into really deep into Doom Patrol, I feel like the music will also get a little weirder.
Because Killjoys was the project that was the most melded so far.
It was, yeah.
But I think you mentioned it's in New York you made it, when we gave out the Kid Carson cassettes. You mentioned that you were kind of finally getting the comics and the music in the right order.
I kind of was, yeah. I realized that the comics really need to come first. The music is a kind of secondary part of it, and there was a version of Killjoys that was very different. It wasn't connected to the band that I think Sean and I really enjoyed. But then, like, when you see these opportunities to create big art and really go for it, you tend to take them, you know?
Yeah.
Even if it probably changes your original intent. And but the Killjoys comic and that whole experience was just really difficult because there were so many spinning plates. You had, like, the costumes, the videos, you had the comic, it was kind of this, it was a little too much. It was too much to do.
Did that start with you and Sean, or was that something you handed over to Sean?
It started with Sean and I. We started developing, and it wasn't meant to be the concept for the album for the band. But Sean and I, we started working on it together, and then the deeper I got, you know, like I was saying, like all the things I work on, I don't try to connect them, they just end up connecting. So that's what happened there. It was just, it was inspiring what I was doing with music, and then we're like, let's put them together. You know?
Where did Sean come from? Because
Sean was in Frank's band, Pencil Prep, and he was the keyboard player, and he was also technically our first merch person, even though like he wasn't really, like he sold the merch for us, but he also helped, and like he was in the band and he helped us with gear, and he was kind of there for emotional support. We used to make up these stories in the band, like Mikey and he and I, and it was just amazing. So years later, we reconnected with each other, and we wanted to keep telling stories together.
Yeah, because he's really turned into, I mean, a writer in his own right.
Oh God, yeah.
Neverboy was really great.
Neverboy was great. Yeah.
You seem to, as you go, you sort of almost gather your own repertory group. Like
Yes.
You got John, you got Sean Simon, you got Becky.
Yeah.
It feels almost like you're creating your own superhero group that you guys travel with.
It's cool, yeah. You know, because I connect with these people. Like I knew, well, I'd always loved Sean Simon, but he reached out one day and he was just like, dude, I got really into comics, I got really into writing, and it was seemingly almost out of nowhere. And he was developing this really amazing like library of books, like Hellboy and Grant's X-Men, and he was reading the right stuff that on his own. I wasn't directing him towards that. And then he would send me stuff that he was working on. And I was like, you have to do comics. You have to be a comics writer. And yeah, I felt the same way about Mikey and also Becky. Like she was always, you know, killing it and doing great work. But there is kind of a group of us in a way, you know, and it's amazing to still work with Becky on Shade.
Yeah, she has been sort of kind of keeps surprising us with the Shade covers.
Yeah.
Like there's they issued a Shade number 10, the cover Becky just turned in, is unlike any of the covers she's done so far, but it's like super cool.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
What's the process like with you and John right now in Cape Carson? How much are you putting in, and how much is he then taking from that?
Well, he's taken over fully as the scripter, and basically what we do is we get together a lot. We don't live that far from each other, so we get together a lot, and we'll meet up at my house, and then we'll just sit there and we'll just talk about the story. We'll just keep talking through it. We'll add more details, and then we have a general idea of the story and what's going to happen, and then he goes and executes it. So, which has been amazing because it's allowed me to not only is he a great writer and he's turning even more into a great writer all the time, but it allows me to go and focus on things like the imprint and do control if I'm not like co-scripting a comic.
And we've called you a lot of different titles for Young Animal, but in a way you're pretty much like the creative director. Like,
yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels like creative director.
Because folks go through me for the regular editing, but then it always hits a point where it shifts over to you. You kind of hash through a lot of the creative ideas.
Yeah, that's important to me because I kind of like to take a look at an idea somebody has and just help with it and just kind of say, let's adjust it a little bit this way. It is like curating, it is like art directing or creative directing. And I feel like that's one of my strengths, so I just play to that as opposed to maybe super editorial stuff, even though I do like to ask questions about the stories that are brought in.
Right. So actually, so with Mother Panic, you co-created that with Tommy Lee Edwards and then brought in Jody Hauser to finish it off. How was that felt now? You were talking about that eventually with Super Patrol, someone will carry on. How have you seen that maybe happen in Mother Panic, where you see someone take this character?
The work that Jody is doing right now is amazing, and I think the character, creating the character was exciting in a way to see maybe what somebody does a decade from now with the character. I think it could be really cool. But you know, Jodie's just doing such a great job. I'd imagine that she's going to be on the book a long time, you know, until she wants to try something else.
So in addition to the Young Animal stuff, you are currently working on Umbrella Academy 3.
Yep.
So, 1 and 2 are so totally different from one another in the types of stories you're telling. How is 3 going to sort of evolve from there?
3 takes a look at characters that we maybe haven't gotten to look at yet. 3 takes a look at some of the villains. Takes some look. It kind of pulls back. Umbrella is a main factor in Series 3, but there's more characters now. You get deeper into the psychology or rehabilitation of villains, and you know, it's about strange and unusual punishment, and it deals a lot with that.
How far down how much Umbrella Academy stories do you have? How far down?
I've always planned there to be 8 graphic novels, so and now they're supposed to come out super regularly. Like that's the idea, is we want to have at least one series a year.
Yeah.
So we're on 3 now. He's drawing issue 2. I'm writing issue 3. It's slower going, but it's still happening. You know, we got off track for a little bit because I had to start the imprint, and I helped start it, and he was working on Casanova and 2 Brothers, so he had some stuff going on too. But now we're focused back on Umbrella.
And is Dave Stewart coloring?
Yeah, everybody's come back. Nate Pico's doing the lettering. Dave Stewart's doing colors with the whole team.
Yeah, and we have Nate Pico's lettering Bug now.
Yes, I'm excited about that. Yeah, I love Nate's work.
Yeah, he's like, I think one of the unsung letterers right now. His stuff is just so clean and versatile. How does it feel like working actually with someone like Todd Klein, who's like a legendary letterer?
It feels amazing. It's a bit intimidating when you're working with somebody like Todd, because she's just like, you know, they've created so many amazing ways of speaking and listening to these characters. To then have to work with them and then ask them for changes sometimes is a little intimidating.
Yeah, I hired him I was editing a new Vigilante series, and I looked back at the first series and was like, oh my god, Todd Klein lettered Vigilante. So I had him come back, so I'm like, I've got to keep that going.
Yeah.
I was kind of like you, where I was younger, I was into the Vigilante characters, and there's an issue of Wild Dog, I think, that actually has a letter by me in it. I don't remember what it says. It's
amazing.
Right into Wild Dog.
Yeah, bringing Wild Dog back was really exciting for us. You know, I felt like that character needed to be out there in the mainstream again.
And what John's been doing with him is just made him really funny, and contrast to Kate has been really cool.
Yes, totally.
So I guess we've got about 10 minutes left. If people want to start asking questions, I just sign up here.
Okay, well, I'll try to get through them really quick.
Oh, you weren't ready or anything.
Okay, green power, is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not on.
No.
I think someone's coming.
Say something to the AV guy in the back.
Oh yeah, hey, the microphone on the floor isn't working.
If you want to tell us, I can repeat the question. Oh.
It's on.
There it is.
All right,
Yay. All right.
Hi, Gerard.
Hi.
I was just wondering, because if Warner Brothers and DC did approach you about it, would you rather see Umbrella Academy or Doom Patrol as a TV series or movie series?
Ooh, I think, you know, I think that Doom Patrol would be an amazing TV series. I also feel like Umbrella Academy would too. I kind of like to see them both as TV series. You know, I think that the way we're telling the story lends itself well to that format.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's up?
Hey?
Sorry, I can't remember. So I was actually listening to this really old podcast with you and your brother and Kevin Smith.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Oh, it's brilliant. And you actually talk about how difficult it is sometimes to create new projects because, you know, with every album or comic, you put all of your life experience into that project. So what do you draw from to keep creating and keep pumping out all of these projects now?
I think it's I think I draw from the challenge. I think that's now what drives me, is I like stuff that's difficult for me.
Yeah.
Back then I used to like to make things difficult for myself, and now I like to find challenges that are difficult and kind of get through them, and that's what really inspires me. Like, I'm really feeling I'm pushing myself with Doom Patrol, like in ways that I've never pushed myself before, whereas almost to the point where I go back and write Umbrella Academy, it almost feels a little too easy, so now I have to make that more difficult. So.
Right. Hi, I'm
Hi.
a really big fan.
Right on.
I'm just wondering, I kind of want to become an artist, but I'm not quite sure how I would do that. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what, like, one of my teachers in art school told me when I kept saying, like, I want to be a comic artist, I want to be a comic artist, he kept saying, like, well, then just go ahead and do it. Which is, it does kind of make sense. Like, before art school, I was making stuff simply because the drive was there and I enjoyed doing it, and I was just making comics all the time. It got more difficult when I went to art school because then a lot of the mystery of stuff got pulled away. But, you know, creating your own scene in a way, not in a weird way, in a way, creating this scenario where you are making your art and you're making your books and you're kind of like this force and you're just doing it, eventually, like, people do take notice of that. So if you want to do that, aside from like taking life drawing classes and looking at your favorite artists, is to simply just do it until you feel like at the point where you're very confident about what you're doing.
Thank you. You're a really big inspiration for me.
All right on.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a big fan.
Hi.
And I love that you brought back Shade.
Oh, cool.
The young animal.
Yeah.
Thanks. Are there any like other obscure comics that you want to see like brought back through like young animal?
At the moment, I'm trying to think about, without giving too much away, what we've got in the pipeline. We've got, well, we have Bug coming, and then we have one that's another original idea, which is new. And then we have another character that was slightly obscure that is coming back. And then we have a take on a more mainstream character, or a mainstream world that's very connected to the DC universe that we're bringing in. So it's a mix, again. Again, we have an original, a mainstream one, and an underground type character.
Thanks for giving Changing Girl her own comic book.
Oh, cool.
Too.
Yeah, it was important to us to be connected to the old books too, to
Yes.
the Milligan stuff, and to be connected to the original Shade, the Steve Ditko stuff.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
What advice would you have for someone who wants to go into writing?
It's pretty similar to the drawing thing. It's just I'll even give you the advice that Grant gave me back when I was kind of struggling going in and out of writing. He just said, just make sure you do it every day. Just always be doing it. If you do it because you love it, and there's also that fear that's really difficult that you have to get past, this fear of like it not being good enough or not succeeding, and that's one of the biggest difficulties of writing. But I think if you just constantly do it and do it because you love it, again, you'll gain this confidence to be able to submit, and you should always be submitting stuff. Mhm. Hi.
Big fan.
Oh, right on.
Snickers.
Okay.
Are you like planning on broadening your horizons and what you do anytime you feel like?
Oh, like finding new stuff to do?
Yeah.
Well, I've turned every single one of my hobbies into jobs. So I'm trying to hold off on that with other things. Like, I really enjoy Dungeons and Dragons and I enjoy gaming, but I've not gone down the road of trying to make games because I really still want to just enjoy them.
Hello. So I just wanted to say I really enjoyed your tracks on Matt Klein's Wrong Child.
Oh, cool.
I'm just curious, what was it like working with Matt? Because he seems like a character.
He is a character. He's really amazing. He's hardworking too. It was just great working with him. I love his voice. I love his music and his vibe. It was just really fun. We just went and hung out for a day and just recorded some vocals.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So, my little brother was the one with the hat. I think we grew up listening to My Chemical Romance. We got the first album when he was 6.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, I noticed that you pretty much collaborate on almost everything with people you know or your brother.
Right.
And I was wondering if you grew up with Mikey and what things you guys obsessed over together.
Well, we were really into, like, Star Wars and He-Man and G.I. Joe and kind of like Saturday morning cartoons, and we would make stories up together and collaborate. But a lot of it was like just hanging out and pretending to be like Han Solo or Luke Skywalker or something, especially if it was like snowed out and we got like, 8 inches of snow, and we're just like pretending that it's hot. So we were always kind of making these little stories together, and we would go on to keep doing that.
I think he's gonna kill me, but his legal name is Indiana Jones.
Oh, that's amazing.
Have to mention that.
That's amazing. Nice. That's great.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a huge fan.
Oh, right on.
My favorite album of all time. So, I wanted to say, I go through some really hard things that sometimes and people bring me down, and I know that you've been through some hard things in the past. So, do you have any good advice for me to like?
I think what I've learned over the years is like, when you experience maybe hard times or depression, a lot of it is your reaction to things, but a lot of it is your brain chemistry. And the trick is to stabilize your brain chemistry, and the way you can do that is through talk therapy and things like that. It's very important and valuable. Medication aside, like that's not something that's not a road you have to go down, even though it's something that I benefit from and I support. But really it's about stabilizing that brain chemistry, and then you start to develop the tools to deal with the difficult things and the people that bring you down. And really nobody brings you down anymore. They really don't. Like, I have all the tools now because I've worked so hard in therapy just to deal with these negative and positive things happening in my life. But I think talk therapy is like, you don't have to put any chemicals in your body if you don't want to, you just talk. Talking is really helpful and important.
What's your D&D character?
That's a great question. I used to solely play half Elven Rangers or Elven Rangers. But right now, I'm playing basically my very first D&D character from the 3rd grade, which is I'm playing a paladin named Vincent, and he looks like Gary Oldman. From Dracula. He's really mean and intimidating, and he'll like grab people by the face and mash their face. He's a vengeance paladin, so I really like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
I haven't tried that yet. I'm a dwarven druid, so I have a really nice beard.
That's nice. That's nice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
You said you felt connected with each member of the Doom Patrol.
Yeah.
So which one of the cast do you like to write with the most?
I laugh the most when I'm writing Cliff. I get to be probably the most personal maybe when I'm writing Larry. And I get to show my positive side the most when I'm writing Casey. I get to really have that show through. But I have the most fun writing Cliff, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My question was, how does it feel knowing that a lot of My Chemical Romance fans kind of came to comics through seeing your name on Doom Patrol? Because I know for me, I just got into comics maybe in the last year or so, and I just stumbled into a local comic shop, and I was like, that's your And I just want to know how you felt about
I feel amazing about that. And a lot of the reason to get into comics again, back when I wanted to do Umbrella Academy, was to bring all of these fans into reading. And they're reading specifically comics because comics were so important to me in my life that I was like, well, how can I help comics? Because comics they do good sometimes they're struggling. I think at the time it was a little shakier time in comics. But But I love that they come from the music and go into reading. I think it's really cool and important.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
My question is, what was your favorite issue of Doom Patrol to write?
I think my favorite was actually issue 6. That was my favorite to write because I felt like we were able to reward ourselves finally. The team was finally together. They were clicking really well. Writing the characters got a little more effortless. And it just felt like a celebration at the end, issue 6. I am very excited for y'all to read issue 6. I love it.
Thank you.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey.
So, thanks for making badass music, but also I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When you feel like when you're working on Doom or Umbrella and you just feel like it isn't right, is there like a ritual, do you do something to open up your mind to get ideas flowing?
Meditate, burn some sage, fuck around with some crystals. Sorry to be cursed, sorry. I went the whole time without cursing. Let's see. Do the dishes. Go for a walk. I was just talking to somebody last night, we was talking about writer's block, and they were saying yeah, do dishes or I do chores. Mike Joe was saying that last night, right? I did the dishes. And I was gonna chime into him and say yeah, do the dishes too. Doing a mundane task, you kind of, then you realize how much more fun you'd be having if you were writing. And then you go back and write because of that.
We have to sing. This will be our last question. The next one's our last.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
How did you develop your art style?
I've looked at a lot of different artists, and the ones that really spoke to me, stuff like Bloom County and Mark Silvestri and then Rob Layfield, and there's all these artists, but then I kept discovering more and more and more and more artists, and I just, then Mobius, when I discovered Mobius, that kind of changed everything. I love Knockets, all that stuff, so I just looked around and what I love and responded to.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.